Today we kick off with the idea of climate change. Or climate adaptation, I would say at this point. Um, but one of the areas that we are not talking about is uh, migration. The title is the migration, the hidden crisis of climate change. The idea is that, as we already see small countries like Tuvalu and a few others that are already deciding to get people out of their countries because there's no longer arable land. You can't grow the food. The soil is, the water level is too salinated. We have other places where the sea level rise is increasingly compacting the country into denser and denser populations. Lots of these things are happening. But I had this thought: if you have to move people from one country or to another because of migration, if one person is in a prison in one country, what do you do? Do you put the same person in the prison in another country? What's the jurisdiction? Uh, does the new country even have the right to put the person in a prison? I mean, the reason I bring this up is this kind of thing is quite complex. And if you have to get this worked out, it cannot be done when the water is rising. It has to be worked out, fairly 10, 20 years before to have any kind of manageable numbers to execute. So enviable task. I have Shabri, who's working at the uh, UN for migration, and that's the kind of area we wanted to talk about because all of us, especially in this part of the world, Sri Lanka, landing. I think next stop is Antarctica, so we are looking at a very large ocean. Opportunities for us to work these things out is quite imminent. Let's start with that.
Yeah, thanks, Asanka, for that great summary of the problem that we face. As Asanka mentioned, the discussion will shine a spotlight on the hidden crisis of climate change, which is migration. Moderating this panel is Meghana Dutta, is a founding partner of Studio Decode, an award-winning architecture and urban design firm. Studio Decode designed the greenest retail building in India for Puma Global. Joining her on stage are the panelists Dr. M. Sanjayan, Dr. Richard Jeo, Shabari Nair, and Dr. Harinda Vidanage. Dr. M. Sanjayan is an accomplished conservation scientist, documentary host, and leader in global conservation efforts. We heard from him yesterday, and we're excited to hear more. Maybe he can expand on some of the things that he briefly touched upon during his speech yesterday. Dr. Richard Jeo is the Chief Field Officer and Senior Vice President of the Asia Pacific Field Division of Conservation International. With over 22 years of experience in the field of conservation, he holds a PhD in neuroscience from Caltech and a bachelor's in biology from the University of Oregon. Shabari Nair leads key initiatives for the UN's International Organization for Migration in Ankara, Turkey. His career includes roles with the International Labour Organization, the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and Switzerland's Federal Department of Foreign Affairs. Dr. Harinda Vidanage is the director of the Center for Strategic Assessments at KDU and a senior advisor for the Center for Law and Security Studies, Sri Lanka. A senior Fulbright scholar, he completed his PhD at the University of Edinburgh. He advocates for strategic thought, global political awareness, and expansion of the policy think tank space in Sri Lanka. From disappearing islands to digital nations, our panelists will unpack how humanity can adapt when home itself is at risk. Panelists, while I do make your introductions, please make your way to the stage for the day. Thank you.
So good morning. We have an excellent panel today, and each of them have a very diverse kind of a strength, and that's what climate change is all about, where people from different strengths have to come together to solve a global problem. So we have Sanjayan and Richard as, I would say, the earth side, and Shabri would be the human side, and Harinda would be the systems. So we have the systems, the human, and the earth. So that's how we're going to start it. And I have one question that I'm going to start with, but I will answer that question at the end of the panel. So that question is, what is the connection? You can think about it. What is the connection between low libido, economic stability, and migration. Just think about it. Okay? So we will get back to that at the end of it. You hopefully will get the answer with all the questions that I'm asking, and you'll get the answer. If not, the professor will come here and answer him himself. Okay? So the opening question, we're not going to talk about why is the sea level rising, because I think you've seen all that, heard enough of that. So we'll dive in straight to the questions, and each one will have a different question, so we don't even repeat the answers, because I want to get the best out of each of you. Start with Harinda. So with any migration, it always ends up as two parallel cities. One which the migrants occupy, the unseen, the unheard, where the policymakers don't even see them, even though they may be 40%, 50% of the city. So how do you as a strategic consultant, or in that specialty, like where you analyze statistics, you can predict, how do you accommodate for two parallel cities?
Thank you. I was expecting the last question, but it's okay. In the context of migrant numbers, let me give you an example. Like for the last year, take OECD as a group, you have about 160 million in the OECD countries who are born as foreigners. So it gives you a sheer picture of how migration numbers have what we call as human mobility for various purposes have been used. The strategic question, let me just rewind a little bit. The strategic question for any country is, when you say a country's strategic interest, it's countries, as you said, the national, economic, human, security, and its survival. So you do strategize to achieve that. So one of the challenges in the current migration discourse today is the fact that migration is hugely what we call securitized for various reasons. So, and you can see, if you look at general global political tendencies are all quite different now. And they also have migration as a political theme, political issue, as well as a political weapon. So how do you address when migration is securitized, weaponized, right? And it's the main issue, right? As well as it's actually there. So if you are a strategic thinker, or when you say strategic, at the end of a strategist or strategic thinking, the ultimate result is a policy outcome. How do you influence policy? So I think this is where I think institutions like they're doing fantastic work, but as you said, there is a human side to it. But I think what we lack is a bit of a strategic kind of a policy related, what we call applied research, that is conducted on migration. Sometimes when we conduct research on migration, there is a humanistic aspect to it. But I think when you look at from a strategic perspective, you sometimes need to kind of dial down your humanity in a certain way, because at the end it's about the existence. So in short, I don't want to take a lot of time, but I would say I think there has to be a certain capacity building among institutions, states individually, as well as in a multilateral level, where you look at addressing migration with these hard strategic facts. If not, what happens is you keep producing the plight of migrants, as well as the impact of both the receiving countries as well as the origin points, but we never create tangible solutions or policy alternatives. What policy research and thinking does is gives you policy alternatives. At the moment, it seems it's one of those questions where most people are a bit struggling for policy alternatives, and how do you deal with such situations? And it's very contextual. It's different from where you are, but it really has a major impact. And if you can see how Europe changed after the Arab Spring, the European political landscape as it is now is a direct result of what happened at the Arab Spring. How demographies change. So it is, as you said, migration is not just a simple thing. It's what we call a polycrisis. It's a kind of a polycrisis which is structured at so many levels. So it's an economic crisis, it's a political crisis, it's a crisis of state fragility, it's a crisis of security. So that's where you kind of need to think about it, like you said. So I'll stop it there, and I will get back, go with the thing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Harinda. We will get back to that question of economic position and security. But my only question to Shabari is, migration is climate change to some extent. So can culture migrate when the migrants move into a new place? Can identity survive without the territory that they were born in? Who and how do we decide?
I love the subparts to these questions. Can culture migrate? Let me note them down. Yeah.
Can identities survive? And who and how do we decide?
Who and how decides? Okay. Good morning, all. What an absolute pleasure it is to be here today. I liked how Prashant started by saying that yesterday's bar was set very high. I'm here to lower that bar. It's, in so many different ways, I have personally experienced culture migrating. I grew up in Qatar. Yesterday, I was so struck by the point that you made, Sanjayan, about the carbon emissions in the Amazonia and how that equates per capita to Qatar, right? So we're talking about a country, Qatar. Has anybody taken Qatar Airlines? Have you been to Doha? 3 million people, right? That's the population of Qatar. Guess what the Qatari population is? How many Qataris do you think live in Qatar or are from Qatar, the nationality? Any show of hands. Anybody want to take a wild guess? Asanka. 600,000. Brilliant. Actually, much lesser. It's about 300 to 400,000. So out of 3 million, 2.6 million, ladies and gentlemen, look like Sri Lankans, Indians, Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, or Nepalis. 2.6 million. And out of those 2.6 million, 850,000 look like me. Which means 1/3 of the Qatari population is Indian. You tell me, do you think culture has migrated? Absolutely. My father, when he first went to Qatar, said that he did not have any problem in finding Indian food. In fact, the Qataris, the local population, and the other expatriates, migrants, have more Indian food than they have their own food. So can culture migrate? Absolutely. Language. In Qatar, they say, or in the Gulf predominantly, a region that speaks Arabic in the Khaliji style, where they say, as far as language is concerned in the Gulf, they say it is better to know Malayalam than it is to know Arabic. So if you can speak my mother tongue, I come from the state of Kerala, you're actually much better off in Qatar simply because the people who are in the service industry are not your Qataris. They are my people from my home state of Kerala, and they will be ready to do anything for you if you say, Namaskaram, ella sugale, which is, hello, is everything fine? That's enough for you to get your job done. So can culture migrate? Absolutely. I think we need to now go beyond the idea of food and culture and language and dressing. And the reason why I say that is because 9 out of 10 times, these are not the countries that have a closed view to migrants or anybody who's moving as a result of climate change or other adverse disasters affecting countries of origin. The problems are in the Europes. The problems are in the North of America. And the reason for that is because of democratic movements. You see, every time the Europeans put the Gulf countries or the Middle Eastern countries or other countries under the scanner and say, you're violating the human rights of people, the Gulf countries will say, before you question us, recognize the fact that people from all over the world, irrespective of their class, irrespective of their economic background, irrespective of their skills, are allowed to come into our country. Now think about how many such people can go into a Europe. So much more difficult. So, who are the worst affected by climate change? It's the people at the lowest rungs of the ladder of humanity. These are the people who want to first move. These are the people who are first affected. And these are the people who do not gain entry to a Europe, who do not gain entry to North America because they don't have the required skills. They are the people who are most desperate. And I think that to an extent is why identities in Europe may not survive, because there is a pushback. Xenophobia is huge. It's about us versus them. It's about you versus me. It's about the white versus the black. It's about the developed versus the developing. That has got to end. You don't see that in the Gulf. You don't see that in other parts of South Asia or Africa as an immediate consequence to migration. But you see that more obviously, in much more evident terms, in Europe and other parts. How is this desirable, or who decides this? Governments. And governments have a big role to play in this. And I think to an extent, democracies today also need to show a certain sense of maturity in terms of how people are sensitized to this. Are we going to play vote bank politics here? Are we going to try and cater to a xenophobic tendency and accordingly decide if migrants are allowed inside the country or not? Then that is a huge onus of responsibility on governments. I'll stop there, Meghana. Thanks.
I want to take it a step back in terms of migration, maybe within a country, maybe from one town to a city. Like we were discussing, migration doesn't always have to be to another country. It could be as simple as drought in a village, due to which, the villagers would move into a city. And when they do move, usually the infrastructure that the governments create for them is a physical infrastructure, right? It's not an emotional infrastructure. They don't create a sense of belonging. So one of the meetings that I had last time with a lot of developers, the top developers in Bangalore, they said as soon as the work is over, they're going back to the state they belong to. And now in Uttar Pradesh, if you know a little bit of India, there are 5 states in the north which majority of the labor comes from, to the city. They migrate because they don't have a livelihood over there. And now that those states are developing, these people don't want to come to Bangalore. So their question is, they just go back. So my question to them, have you ever done anything for them? Have you invested to create a sense of belonging for them? Never. So why should they stay back? So my question to you, Richard, is how can we create, or how can we ensure that policy takes care of creating emotional infrastructure in terms of a city that provides social spaces for them, a city that can contain, all emotions, right? Emotions that we hold as privilege and emotions that they need to hold. How do we do that?
Well, thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's a delight to be here. And I thought I had passed on this question because this is a very tough question, but I'd love to answer this. So I'll just introduce myself briefly. My name is Richard. I'm the Chief Field Officer for Conservation International. I'm based in Singapore, and I work on nature conservation. So thinking about the emotional infrastructure in a city is an unusual question for me.
You're a neuroscientist.
I'm a neuroscientist, by academic training. So I guess I can sort of draw on some of that background.
The question was meant to happen. You didn't tell me about the neuroscientist background.
So I think part of this, reflecting on this, I'm Japanese heritage. I'm American, as you can hear from my accent. My grandparents migrated to the United States in the 1920s, right after World War I. And the reason for that was because the economic conditions in Japan at that time were very difficult. It's like Japan was a largely agrarian society, and they basically had run out of space for new farms. And there was a policy to push people out, and the United States was welcoming at that time labor. So grandparents on both sides with this dream of new horizon, a new life for them and their families. They moved to the American West, to Idaho, and started families. My dad is the 10th of 10 kids in a large agricultural family. My mom is 9th of 11 kids. And at that time, it was very tough to be Japanese in the American West. So the emotional support there, was almost nothing. And then, after World War II or during World War II, many Japanese immigrants were interned, for no reason at all. So it was the opposite of providing this emotional support for the people who the country had just 10 years earlier, really, the policy was to try to get labor, so the country can develop. So this is a really critical question. And I think part of it is also, can we prevent some of this migration, even in countries, by providing economic opportunities to people in rural areas that previously did not have them. And there's huge opportunity there to sort of adapt to the climate crisis, around creating a restoration economy. Sri Lanka is a place where this can really happen. Unlike many countries, Sri Lanka, most of the population is still largely rural and still has this agrarian livelihood drivers, these economic drivers that are present in these countries, in the rural areas, and creating opportunities around restoring nature, things like planting native forests, planting food forests, doing restorative agriculture, regenerative agriculture, provides both jobs and livelihoods for the next generation. It's like, people in here, how many of you, directly work in agriculture? I bet almost none. One. It's like, how many of you's parents worked in agriculture? How many of you's grandparents worked in agriculture, right? So this is the demographic trend of the world. It's like, when my grandparents moved to the United States, something like half of the country was working in agriculture. Now it's like 4%. This is an area that's ripe for economic development that can provide the adaptation we need to the climate. And I think that's a big part of the solution. And then providing this emotional support for the migrants is a question that I don't really know how to answer, to be honest. So thank you.
Thank you. I want to ask you this question, Sanjayan. So this is about how migration can be seen as a shared global responsibility, but it's a very indirect question. So let's say an MNC, I don't know if Pepsi or Coca-Cola, any of those, right? They come and set up their center in a town, in a city, in India, where it's primarily agricultural land. They have been given permission, let's say, to drill only 5 bores or 10 bores to go 1,000 meters deep. But obviously, MNC being an MNC, first of all, they've come to a developing nation so that they can make use of cheap water and cheap labor to manufacture. But what the consequence is, instead of 1,000 meters, the borewell goes 2,000 meters. Instead of 5 borewells, they'll dig 100 borewells. And overnight, the entire village has lost its livelihood because they depend on wells, not borewells. So the wells dry up and they have no agriculture. So they move into a city. So that's migration, right? So how do we take this as a shared global responsibility that wherever they go, whichever country they go to, there are certain ethics that they follow so that migration due to these kind of, that it becomes a consequence is avoided?
Thank you for that, but and I'm happy to answer that. But I just would like to comment one thing on what my colleague said, and I'm going to humbly disagree a little bit. So, how long have you been? Were you born in Qatar? Raised in Qatar. So all your life there. When I ask you a question, where are you from? What do you say? Exactly. He says India. When someone asks me where I'm from, my instinct is to say I'm from the United States. And the same thing with Richard. So what you're getting wrong about this is in the United States and in the West, when you're an immigrant, despite recent problematic trends with certain presidents, for the most part, when you go there as an immigrant, you get all the rights and privileges of being a citizen eventually. In the Middle East, that just doesn't exist. And in most of the South-South migrations that you see, that is only happening because at some point, if the government decides they're going to send all the Indians back to India, Qatar will do it like that. And no one's going to say much about it, and it'll just happen. Now, it'll collapse their economy, for sure, and I don't think anyone there sensibly is going to ever do that. But there is a difference. There's a fundamental difference, right? Like, think about it just for a second. Like, a year and a half ago, a half Indian woman, half South Indian woman, ran for the presidency of the United States and came pretty close to winning, all things considered. That ain't going to happen anywhere in Qatar. It's not going to happen. I bet it won't happen in Singapore. I bet it won't happen if you move to China. I bet you if you immigrate to Japan, it's not going to happen. I bet you if you immigrate to most places in the world, it's not going to happen. It only will happen, or it only currently happens, in the Nordics, in Western Europe, in North America, and Australia and New Zealand. That's it. That's a fundamental challenge and a fundamental difference. Now, that's okay, right? Like, I have relatives, family members who've lived their entire lives in UAE. I have cousins who were born in the UAE, and they have sort of the right to residency and the right to return. They're pretty integrated there. They consider that their home. They don't still call themselves Emiratis. They absolutely don't call themselves Emiratis. Every holiday, they come back, guess where? Here. Back to Sri Lanka. So here's and why does that matter to the climate immigration crisis? It matters to the climate immigration crisis because people who migrate because of climate change, really migrate because of climate change, do not expect to ever go back. So when Palau disappears under the waves, every person in Palau will have to leave that country, which is imminent. You know, this we're now talking about in our lifetimes, right? Certainly in the lifetime, at least the young people in this room. They do not expect to go back to Palau because the country won't exist. Physically, just won't exist. So there's that subtle but very important distinction to happen. Now, the second thing I would say is that, well, I'll just leave it there. So just when you think about climate migration, like at its most extreme, that's the way to think about it. Now, there's one other thing I'd just add, which is slightly sort of a friendly amendment to what you said. Interestingly, I think that after 100 years, people will have the opportunity to go back. So yes, climate change is not one way, nor is it inexorable. What do you call it? It's not just, it can be reversed. And I believe, and I think some other people or who are technologists believe, that within 50 to 100 years, we will be able to reverse climate change at large scale. So what we're dealing with is really this funny moment in human history where we have to deal, or a tragic moment in human history, where we will have to deal with a massive, massive challenge, whether we like it or not. But it doesn't necessarily mean that, say, 100 years from now, you're not going to be able to reverse some of the challenges of it, because there are technologies that are able to sequester carbon. They're just not scaled. We can't do them cheap enough, but I'm confident that we will. My big worry is we're not doing it fast enough to deal with much of the misery that comes around. And I completely ignored your other question, which is about. Sure. Sure. So, for companies, look, I'll say two things, right? So companies are on the hunt for resources. That is for sure true. And most of the global companies, I think that most of them, if they are seen to be doing bad things, really do get punitively punished. I think there's enough of a social democratic movement out there, really fueled by the internet, fueled by social media in particular, that makes it quite hard now for big companies to act with impunity and create damage, particularly in the developing world. So while I think that that's a real issue, I don't think that's an issue that's going to get worse. Very recently, it was quite dramatic in Zambia. People got really, really upset with how a couple of Chinese companies were operating. And it really threatened to even sort of upend the government. And the government, who I don't think wanted to act, was forced to act because there was such social anger in the way in which this particular Chinese company had operated, and it wasn't a particularly good company. It's just why I'm not using that as a general, I'm not making a general statement about Chinese company. It was just so happened that one company was not acting in good faith. So I think that's the case. The second thing I would say is that over the long run, though, I don't think that Western companies are coming to the developing world simply because of cheap labor and cheap resources. They're actually coming much more now because of technical skills, right? So, Tim Cook has a very famous speech where he talks about why, Apple invested so heavily in China, and he's like, that's not because of cheap labor. It's because they can build things that we cannot physically do and manufacture right now in the United States at a skill level that is astonishingly good. So the faster that the countries in our part of the world get that kind of skill level, the more likely that we're going to have the economic lifeline. Thanks.
Meghna, may I?
I'm talking about something I know nothing about.
No, but I love it. And I think this is exactly what it is supposed to be, right? Asanka and Kandi, it's big, bold, and brave. So let's live up to being big and bold and brave, shall we? We're sitting here amongst Harvard people, 1,000 feet above sea level? No? 500? Okay. 300. All right. We're sitting in the clouds at Cinnamon Life having this conversation. There's a joke in Harvard. How do you know somebody went to Harvard? They'll tell you they went to Harvard. And we do that all the time. We'll slip it in. When I was at Harvard, and we are having this conversation at a very elite level. We are having this conversation with very privileged status. We are having this conversation with people who think, act, and behave like us. But that's not the case for the majority of the world. Have we gone down to understanding that? The Qataris are not pretending to give you a citizenship. The Qataris will say, no citizenship, my friend. Emiratis will say, no citizenship, my friend. But come here, work, make your money, make a life for yourself and go back. That's what they're doing. So nobody who goes to Qatar aims to be the president of the country. They just want to make a life. Majority people who are running climate change, running away from climate change and disasters, are not wanting to necessarily settle down in the United States or anywhere else in Europe. They just want to escape the difficulties of where they are coming from. And 9 out of 10 times, even that is not accepted in a lot of these countries. In most cases of migration as a result of climate change disasters, you think the person from, let's say, Gampaha in Sri Lanka is going to Qatar? No. Or the Middle East? No. That person is first coming to Colombo because this is where the jobs are. So 9 out of 10 times, it's internal migration first. And then they find an opportunity here to perhaps go overseas. Right at the outset, every conversation that we need to have is not about people like us. What it was like, Sanjayan, when you migrated, when your parents migrated, when your family migrated to the States is not the situation now. Truth Social is the latest social media. Has anybody followed Truth Social? Because if you haven't, then this is a quote from March 17, 2025. And it says, after years of being held captive by environmental extremists, lunatics, radicals, and thugs, allowing other countries to gain tremendous economic advantage over us, I am authorizing my administration to immediately begin producing energy with beautiful, clean coal. What are we, Sanjay?
But I don't. So what's the point?
The point I'm
I mean,
trying
you
to
guys,
make is-
Qataris just gave him a $400 million jet. Like, I don't get the point. Like, so we got a crazy
Sure.
president.
Sure. Sure.
So what? Many countries have crazy presidents.
The point I'm trying, but the point I'm trying to make is let's not defend one over the other. Let's not say that everything's perfect in the West. That's what I'm trying to say. Because in the context of migration, we have to be aware of the fact that these are not the kind of people who are in the Gulf states, who are in the Arab states, who are pushing back migrants. You know, they're welcoming people. They need people in these countries. They need jobs to be done. And that's what they're doing. But that's not the case in Europe or the
They're
US.
welcoming them for a deeply selfish interest, national interest, which is fine. Because if you're fleeing, you're going to take
I just want to put bread and butter on my table.
100%.
Right?
But
I don't care
some-
whether it's your
but
selfish
at some
interest.
point, you got to be open to going back. And that's
sure.
that's the fundamental
Absolutely.
difference.
That's the idea.
That's the fundamental difference.
The idea is come back home. And we are happy with people who go there like that.
Right, but when people go to the United States, they really aren't thinking we're going back home. The vast majority of people go to the United States, they really want to stay there.
Can I just come in over here?
It's like a fundamental issue there. And, look, everyone likes to point out the Trump thing. And I'm certainly not going to, obviously, I'm not going to sit here and defend, the policies of the United States at this particular moment in time. But, have some level of historical context here, The United States was the largest oil producer, well before Trump. For all the things he's saying, we haven't actually built anything new yet. There's no new coal-fired plants or no new anything. So you understand that things don't move as fast as the news moves. Whereas, so the reality of most people living in the United States is a little different than, what Truth Social is saying.
So
I'm talking about government policies.
this is on. Yeah. So I probably should have very clearly stated we're talking about migration at different levels, right? One is migration where you voluntarily migrate for, the skilled or the educated. And one is the other migration, migrants who are doing it for pure survival. So they're two completely different migration systems, and we cannot put one next to the other. Both are different. How we look at it is different, right? So both of you have different perspectives because you're talking about different countries. It's like comparing an apple to an orange, which is not possible.
Yes, but climate migrants, look, I think it's important. Climate migrants are not going to the Middle East. They're just not. I honestly don't know what Middle East policy there is. If there is, I'd love to know, that are willing to take climate migrants. They're not even willing to take the 2 million sort of Palestinians who are living next door. So good luck trying to get people from Kiribati or Palau or Papua New Guinea as migrants to the Middle East. Ain't gonna happen. As migrants to China, ain't gonna happen. As migrants to Japan, ain't gonna happen. As migrants to Russia, maybe. As migrants to the West, very little. But the solution has to be a little different. You're not going to have that open door really from any country for people who are actually leaving because of climate. It just doesn't happen.
The climate
When there are floods in Kerala in 2018, one of the worst state of, Kerala being the highest migrant sending state within India, because most people in the Gulf come from my state. When there were floods, people are looking for jobs in the Gulf. But the Gulf states are not taking them because of climate migration. The Gulf states are taking them because these people need jobs. But why are these people leaving? They're leaving because of climate, right? So my point is, one may not see the effect, but the other is leaving because of the effect. Okay? So the Qataris are not, or the Emiratis or the Bahrainis are not seeing it as climate issue. They're saying, well, these people want jobs in our countries, great. But these people are leaving because they've been affected by climate. That's the reason why they're moving in the first place. 9 out of 10 times, when you speak to the Gulf countries about climate change and migration, you know what they talk about? They talk about heat stress. They say that if the recorded temperature is, I think, over 45 degrees Celsius, you're not allowed to work in Qatar because or in the Gulf countries, because most workers are in the construction sector. So they're working in extreme heat. Now, in the Gulf countries, there is a massive climate change issue, which is the heat stress issue, right? For construction workers. But you know, sometimes what also happens? The temperature is not publicly announced. Because if they say that it's over 45 degrees, then the nobody can't work, which means that stops construction for a day. Stopping construction for a day is millions of dollars lost, right? That's the problem. And so let's not only look at it in the kind of policies that a Gulf country has to put in place to receive people who are coming from climate-induced places, but they need to design their own climate policies for how their nationals and their residents are taken care of.
So I want to move this question to Harinda. For us to prevent migration, right? Statistically, can you analyze, forecast? It's like almost like we say applied research, academic research. Can we put in more money in R&D so that it's not just an academic research, but it becomes an applied research? So we can forecast, predict movements, and avoid migration because of survival. It should be migration because they want to migrate, not for survival.
Let me try to address that, but we had a bit of a storm here. But for me, storm as a British say, storm in a teacup, but it's not an American phrase. But the point here, what I was wondering, looking at these two guys as a strategist, from a geostrategic perspective, this itself is the crisis, because what we approach global governance and the systemic approach, not the joke but the serious kind of sarcasm is that the old is aging, which is the old which created this system is aging. It is being depleted. It is still hanging on, but there is nothing to fill that gap. So there are a set of middle level range powers which are trying to. So global governance, including this migration, including the climate deal that was struck 10 years ago, they're all in a bit of a flux and a crisis. So it is not about presidents. Presidents are not. They are representative of a system in crisis. It's not about who is in power. It is what brought him or her to power. So, which means it's a systemic. It's a kind of a manifestation of a systemic crisis at a political level, at economic level. That's what's happening. So, I think we are talking about migration at a very harsh point in time. In the 21st century, we are coming to the third decade, and we are talking about, can we prevent migration? Or if we allow, what are the necessities and on what basis? As this debate said about, is it about attracting talent? Is it about, that's in the context of national interests. Does the US want more talent at a higher level, or does the Middle East want to kind of, So my point is, I don't see, frankly, money going into that kind of research in that context. Money is being, I think some of the largest things I have seen, for example, the US has been pumping so much of money on the MENA region research in the context of water stress and all these things, right? So there's not been enough analysis on finding solutions for people movements. I think because it's such a complex thing, so you don't know how to frame a research or a project which informs policy. That is one of the challenges. You can do a research on a drought. You can do a research on a water stress. You can do research on economic migrants. You can do a research on the political impact. But kind of doing because applied, that is where, when I keep saying research, you guys don't know what is about academic jargon. No, there is a big difference between academic research and applied research. Academic research is finding the truth, and applied research is about finding solutions, policy level. So I think we are very academic heavy, sometimes policy poor. especially countries like Sri Lanka, I think where we lack is the one is the visionary thinking taking us towards policy research. It's actually big, bold, and it'll be big, bold, and brave to be a policy person. Policy person advocating the nexus between the actual knowledge and implementing that in policy. So it's not. It doesn't just apply to migration. It applies to many other fields. So, and the problem, coming back to your question, framing a global deal on such things is going to be very hard when even more kind of, if you take, climate change can take a moral high ground, but if you still have, after 10 years, the Paris Accords, being in a crisis, it itself is telling that, there is no more money going to go into that kind of research. But I think, again, the solution lies in that, but I agree with Sanjayan, 100 years later, there might be a solution. There is this geohacking kind of endeavors. There are civil society kind of interests. So I think what we should push is this, the kind of a multilaterality among the civil society and the scientific community to kind of work on this. I don't think any government at this given geostrategic intersection wants to put money on any research on climate, migration, even poverty alleviation. It's all about preparing for war or deterring war. Either way, you need to put money there. Thank you.
But every day that we delay this research, every day the cost of correcting it would multiply, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, take Sri Lanka. I mean, that's people from civil society, look at what happened to Sri Lankan, policy research or civil society active advocacy and all. USAID shut down, Sri Lanka shut down. EU pumping money to the Ukraine-Russia conflict. There is hardly any money coming in. So that's a challenge.
So we have 2 minutes left. I just have one question for you, the last question, because it's then I'll open it up, even though I had a lot more. It's about data centers and water scarcity that everybody is talking about today, right? Data centers sometimes are built in a place without analyzing whether the amount of water resource available for the data center is sufficient, or what are the consequences because of the amount of consumption of water to the data center, and what happens to the people who are already going through water scarcity. That's my question to you.
Yeah, so thanks. These data centers, the impact of them for the climate is very underestimated in the world. Like a medium-sized data center uses something like 300 megawatts, which is about the electricity consumption of a small city like San Francisco, or I'm sure it's more than Colombo uses. There's some interesting solutions out there. One thing, Singapore has a model where any new data center in Singapore, that data center is required to pay the carbon tax based on their emissions, but not just pay the carbon tax, they're required to find high quality carbon credits that can be transferred from another country, because, Singapore can't generate these themselves, in order to build that data center there. That's a great model, because then it incentivizes other countries to sort of get their act together and figure out their registries and how to trade carbon, under the new Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. There's a provision to enable countries to trade carbon between countries. And in this way, the idea is that can really sort of bootstrap or supercharge, this, and accelerate the carbon markets. So we need to really consider the water impact of these data centers in place, and not just the water impact in place, but also the supply chain, because making these semiconductors is one of the most water-intensive and energy-intensive processes on Earth. And there's also good research and thinking about how can natural systems like forests replenish watersheds through just the things that forests do. They catch water, they put it back into the ground, and in that way we can think about nature as part of the infrastructure to support these data centers, before they're built. And that can also be a real economic driver and a job creator to sort of help restore and protect these forests in the same watersheds that the data centers are proposed. So thank you.
One response to that. Carbon credits, for me, it's like a catch-22 situation. It's only to make you feel less guilty. You do something wrong, and then you offset it somewhere else, and you feel like you've done something great. It helps. I'm not saying it doesn't. It's incentivizing somebody else. But at the same time, a lot of countries use it as an excuse not to push innovation sometimes, because they can offset it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, this is one of the criticisms of the carbon market. But some of these things are inevitable, like economic growth and the drivers of emissions are largely inevitable. So being able to offset those in a credible, defensible way, with credits that zero out the impact of things like data centers, I think is a way that the free market can provide financing, to get us to the place where the world is not warming anymore. So I'm a believer in the carbon credit market and the fact that this doesn't just enable bad behavior, but it allows us to get ahead of inevitable impacts.
I want to close it with this last question that we had discussed about, and then we'll just open up for one or two questions. Tehran and the water crisis, and they've not had rains for nearly a year, and the president has suggested evacuation, and they've received a lot of backlash for that. What would you think somebody should do in a position of responsibility with a difficult situation like that?
I mean, I'm so unqualified to speak on that, partly because I've literally only once been to Iran when I was a kid. So, my familiarity with the city is only from what I'm reading, not from personal experience there. I mean, the backlash was because it felt like a very dramatic, draconian step. And I'm not even sure the president who said that, the president of Iran who said that, meant it in quite a literal way. I suspect he was trying to shake people into taking action. Once you're in that mode, you're in a really world of hurt. Now, there are some cities that are proactively doing things to avoid getting into that kind of situation. So an interesting city that was running out of water was the city of Bogota in Colombia. And they were having lots of water crisis and continue to have that. But, the mayor of the city, quite a impressive character, really went out there. There are 11 rivers that still feed the city. And they have put a lot of effort into protecting the forests and the grasslands that provide the water for the city. And they've done that in a proactive way. They've figured out a way to actually have the city pay for it. So they've really mobilized to being able to do that. I think once you're getting into a situation like they have in Tehran right now, they're not even in a place where they can desalinate, so they can't use the sort of oil to do that. They've got leakages in their pipelines. They can't really fix it because of the sanctions that are there. I genuinely don't know what's going to happen there. I think quite literally people will pray for rain, and then when it comes, maybe they'll avoid a catastrophe. But I would watch this space. I will see what will happen in the next 3 months to Tehran, because I think they are in a very, very tough place.
Thank you. I would like to, because we are, it says time is up, and I'm getting the message from there. I'd just like to end it with this note that migration is inevitable due to climate change. Just the pace of it may reduce because of the actions that we may take collectively. So the question is not who moves or where they move, but how do we welcome them into the city where they move? I think that's what the conversation we wanted to focus on, the emotional aspect of migration. How do we make movement more peaceful, more humane, more dignified? And I want to get back to that question. If anybody, one person wants to take the answer for the connection between low libido, economic stability, and migration. Just one person. If nobody comes up, Professor, you have to come up and answer. No. Okay. So Professor, you want to come up? So we named him the libido man in the morning at breakfast.
I am embarrassed. I am very embarrassed. I'm going to hide my face. When I woke up this morning, I decided that, oh, I'm so happy and impressed with Big Bold Brave. I'd like to come back again next year. And if you allow me, I'd like to suggest that I speak on the price of being the economic miracle in modern times. But after being called the libido man, I am having second thoughts. I can imagine when I come into the hall next year, oh, here comes the libido man. Actually, the second lowest libido ranking of Singapore, a seemingly bad ranking, it has been very good for Singapore. Because how do you measure libido? You do a survey, you ask people, how often do you have sex? How do you rate your performance? How do your partner rate your performance? And so on. And Singaporeans are very honest people. So because they are honest, that's why they rank so low in libido. That's a very good ranking for Singapore because if you want to invest in a country, you want to go there to work, to live, to visit, you would like to go to a country where the people are very honest, right? So it was a very good ranking. But we have record low birth rate today. We are the second lowest birth rate in the world at 0.97. So the only solution is migration. And migration has been great for economic development. We estimate now that immigration accounts for 30% of our GDP growth. Okay, I'm not going to run to the toilet or something, okay?
Thank you, and I hope you really had an interesting session with all four of them. Thank you so much.